So welcome to everybody. My name is Thalia. I'll more formally introduce myself in a second, but first the topic. So if you're here to learn about some great sugar-free recipes and how to use different kinds of natural sweeteners and what's the difference between them, you're in the right place because I know quite a bit about them. I love them and they're so much fun, and I can't wait to share some of my personal recipes as well. So for those of you who haven't attended my webinars before, and I've done quite a few, if you go to the Healthy Planet YouTube channel, you can enter my name, Thalia Charney, and find some of the past ones that are a lot of fun. But for tonight, it is on sweeteners. So by way of introduction, I am the Nutrition and Health Education Manager for the Now Health Group. And tonight's webinar is co-hosted by the Now Health Group and Healthy Planet. So thank you to the both of them. I'm a holistic nutrition and wellness coach. I'm also an author, as you can see, of 3 books. I have a very long and extensive background. I've been, a health coach, a personal trainer, a fitness instructor. I've got a background and studied in botanical medicine, herbs, and acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, meditation, essential oils, very eclectic background. And most importantly, I always say when I do any trainings is that I value honesty, objectivity, nuance, and humility. And my name is pronounced Thalia, even though there's an H there, so it is silent but deadly. Just some short housekeeping for tonight. So I've already thanked Healthy Planet and Now Health Group, but can't do that too many times. I want to let you know that the recording will be emailed to you afterwards, and it will also be posted on YouTube. So because I am showing quite a few recipes, you know that you will be able to play them again, see them again. You can always freeze the screen, take a screenshot, or take a picture if there's a recipe you really want to, to have available for you. I will be taking questions at the end, so please write any questions for me in the Q&A area. There's 2 areas, the chat area and the Q&A. So the Q&A area is for myself, and I will get to that at the end just to keep the flow going. So my talk will be about an hour, and then I'll answer questions for 15 minutes. In the chat area, you can chat with one another, share your own ideas and your own thoughts with one another, but I will not be checking that area for questions. However, my lovely co-host, who you can't see tonight, but Richard is here, and he's going to be monitoring the chat area. He will be reminding people to put their questions in the Q&A. He will help you with a link a little bit later on to some great resource on the Now Health Group's website, and maybe he can answer some other questions along the way as well. But for the more technical questions, if Rich can answer them, then put that in the Q&A area. And of course, most of all, enjoy yourself. And I know you will. And have a little patience to get to the recipes at the end, because the stuff before that is really fascinating. It's going to help you to use these sweeteners better. As always, there's the obligatory disclaimer. We have to do it. So the presentation is for general informational purposes only. Doesn't constitute the practice of any professional healthcare services. So the use of information written or stated here or materials linked from here is at the user's own risk. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice. And if you want to, typically I'm often talking about supplements, but if you want to know anything about suggested uses or doses or cautions on products, you can always go to nowfoods.ca. Just a quick reminder about Now, if you're not familiar with them, we are a big family, but Now began with a small family and the founder here at Owlwood. It is a family-owned company for 54 years now, which is quite astounding. And it actually has a beautiful and heartwarming story. If you ever want to read it, you can go to nowfoods.ca and download this book written about Now. If you want to save the paper, but you can probably also get a copy of it somewhere as well if that's of interest to you. So I highly recommend that. You can read it in about an hour. Even though we're talking about natural sweeteners today, I want to start with talking about sugar, because often these natural sweeteners are used by people as an alternative to sugar. So you're attempting to replace sugar. Why? And what is sugar? So this will be about as sciencey as we're going to get. This is, sugar, and can come in different colors and different sizes in terms of how fine it is. But this is a simple sugar molecule. This is glucose. So anytime you're eating any carbohydrates, it eventually breaks down to its simplest part, which is glucose. And that's what you're looking at here. And if you're a nerd like me, you might be interesting to see, firstly, that glucose is this interesting ring structure, but also that it's made up of carbon, it's got oxygen in it, and hydrogen. Now, does sugar cause harm? Because, why should we even replace it? So I'm not going to be one of those fear-mongering people online that says things like sugar is poison. Let's put it into perspective. But for many people, it can be helpful to replace sugar, to replace excess amounts of sugar with other things. So some of the things that are true about sugar is long-term overuse can cause, as one of the causes, pre-diabetes or diabetes. We know that because if we have too much sugar, every time you eat sugar, if we get too much, our glucose goes up in our blood, which is normal. And then you have this hormone called insulin, which has to help get that glucose out of our blood and into our cells, because we need it for energy. But if we have too much of that glucose spiking all the time, then that insulin has to go really high. And eventually our cells tire of the insulin. It's like the story of the boy who cried wolf. They just stop paying attention to it. And so insulin has to go higher and higher. It's like it's shouting louder and louder just to get that sugar to go into our cells. And unfortunately, we don't notice that happening until years down the line, when our blood tests show all of a sudden our sugar, our blood sugars, our glucose are now too high. But from years before that, our insulin keeps creeping up and creeping up and creeping up, and it's not measured in blood test. And that's what's called pre-diabetes. And that's probably more common than diabetes. So that's one thing. Also, if we eat sugar in excess of the calories that, it's a calories in, calories out situation. So if we eat them in excess and our body can't use those calories, then they get stored as fat. So they definitely can contribute to diabetes when in excess of amounts that we can use, which is not hard when you're gouging on lots of sugary sweets that are tempting. Just as an interesting fact, sugar and vitamin C in some cases compete for the same entryway into your cells. And so if you have a lot of sugar, vitamin C sometimes doesn't get into our cells, and so it can inhibit vitamin C, which is important for our immune system. And then, of course, another important thing is just that we eat, sugar in the sense of just plain sugar. It doesn't have any nutrients in it. So if this is a significant part of our calories, it replaces nutrients, and therefore we may not be getting enough nutrients in our diet. So there are some of the reasons why sugar can be harmful. Sugar comes in so many different names in terms of ingredients. So look at this, quite insane. So it's good to be able to spot the different words for sugar on ingredients. Luckily, of course, you can go to the nutrient facts and you can see just the total of sugar, even if you're not looking at the ingredients. But just be aware of that. And now it's interesting. So in terms of our the nutrient facts, so when you're looking at the label on your food, some things have changed in Canada and the US. There's been updates to the sugar component of that. So Health Canada has now created what's called a percentage daily value for sugar. They never used to have that for sugar. They had it for other ingredients. Now they have it for sugar. What the percentage daily value means, so it says down here, it's a reference amount of different nutrients, in this case for sugar, that gives us an idea of how much to consume and how much not to exceed in a day. So it sort of tells us like where would be the upper limit that you don't want to go past in terms of sugar. For other nutrients, it might give you a goal of nutrients you want to get to, you know, the minimum, because for things like vitamin C, you might want to get, you know, up as high as you can. But so they have said that the daily value, the upper limit is 25 teaspoons, where you don't want to go past. Now, it is controversial as to whether that is, you know, the best number or not. For me, I think that's very high. Interestingly enough, if you compare that to the World Health Organization, they have said that 6 teaspoons versus 25 is sort of an optimal limit for the day. Not the limit, but an optimal limit. And the FDA, so if we look at our neighbors down south, their label's a bit different. So they have a daily value, but not for total sugar. They have a daily value for added sugar. So they distinguished it differently between what is naturally occurring sugars in your food and what have they added. So they've added sugar, they've added honey, they've added concentrated fruit juice, and they've said that the top limit for the day of added sugars should be about 12.5 teaspoons. So, you know, there's disagreement for sure. I always encouraged my clients to calculate, at least for one day, but better for 3 days, to see how much sugar they have on a daily basis. And inevitably, they were surprised, and inevitably, they underestimated how much sugar they were getting. So it's quite easy to do, and I think it's a fun exercise. So this is how you would do it. Here's your label, and you can see here's sugar, and 22 grams here in the case of whatever food this is. And it does refer back to the serving size. So you do have to pay attention to, are you eating that 1 cup, or are you eating double that amount? Then you have to double your sugar amount. But it's not very intuitive to just look at it in grams, so I prefer in teaspoons. It's more something that makes sense to us. So all you have to do is take the grams, like 22 grams, divide by 4, and that's going to give you the number of teaspoons in your serving size. So in this case, 22 grams divided by 4 equals 5.5 teaspoons. So you're getting 5.5 teaspoons of sugar if you have 1 cup of whatever this is. And then you keep adding up throughout the day. Do that for a day or two. You might be surprised. Now, in terms of artificial sweeteners, I'm not going to go into great details. I do talk about those and break it down in my book, The Confident Food Shopper. But if you want a more, let's say, neutral, non-biased and objective institution, the Center for Science in the Public Interest, which exists in Canada and the US, I think does a really good job of objectively evaluating ingredients. And they will say like they're absolutely okay. They're ingredients that maybe you should limit, but not necessarily completely avoid. And then there's some you should completely avoid. And they're very science-based. And some of the ones they say you should avoid are artificial sweeteners like a sulfame potassium here, or you might see it as ASK in products. Aspartame, which everyone would know, and sucralose, which, by the way, I sometimes do see in the odd product in the health food store, so look out for that one. All right, so let's get into the alternative sweeteners. That's the topic of tonight. So there's 2 big groups, categories for these, and I'm going to talk about a few products from both. You have, on the one hand, non-nutritive sweeteners. Those are sweeteners that do not add calories. They have 0 calories, 0 effect on your blood sugar. My voice is getting hoarse already. So they don't have any calories, and the ones I'll be talking about tonight are stevia and monk fruit. But there are others, and those would include artificial sweeteners. Then there's a whole other group, nutritive sweeteners. These are ones that do add calories, but there's some that add a lot, like just our regular sugars and all the different words and variations for sugars. But there's another group called alcohol sugars that I'm going to talk about. And those are caloric, but very on the low end. And I'm going to talk about those and how to use them as well. Now, when it comes to sweeteners or sugars, one thing that's often talked about is people want to know what is the glycemic index of that particular sugar or sweetener. The glycemic index is a measure or a way of ranking how do carbohydrates affect our blood sugar. So the definition is the glycemic index is a ranking of carbohydrates on a scale from 1 to 100, or from all the way from the bottom to 100, according to the extent to which they raise blood sugars. So they take, they take some healthy individuals, at least about 12, give them equal amounts of carbohydrate from different types of foods and measure how it impacts their blood sugar. People who are diabetic will definitely know about this. They are told to eat foods mostly in the low glycemic area, say 50 downwards, to eat the majority of their food. And I do try as well to eat most of my foods with a lower glycemic index. You can see that pure sugar, glucose, that's in our blood is a 100, so it's high. That's how we measure everything by that. It's just kind of arbitrary. Table sugar, you can see here, is at a 65. And then I'm going to be talking about these sweeteners, xylitol, which has a glycemic index, but it's very low. Erythritol, which is another, what I call alcohol sugar, though that has a 0 glycemic index, stevia, and monk fruits. I'm going to be talking about ones that have no to, very small, negligible effects on our blood sugar. And by the way, of interest is this isn't just a completely uncontroversial glycemic index. There's all kinds of nuances around this. For example, let's look at the potato. If you take mashed potato, the glycemic index can be up in the 70s. But if you eat a whole baked potato, it may only be around 52, so it's much lower. But if you bake that potato, then put it in the refrigerator overnight, let it cool down and reheat it, it's going to be even lower because it actually transforms. So it's not just the food, but it's how we eat it, how we process it, and then when we combine it with other foods, that's also going to make a big difference. So if we combine our fats with carbohydrates, when we eat it in the day, how stressed we are, do we walk right afterwards or exercise, all these things can make a difference. Now here is a fantastic resource that I highly recommend that you download and save. That's really going to help you to better use all of these alternative types of sweeteners. Richard, hopefully right now, is going to be cutting and pasting the link to Now Foods website to where you can find this chart. We'll do it again at the end. And this chart shows you all the different kinds of sweeteners. So here we have caloric sweeteners, which I'm not going to be talking about today, like the sugars and maple syrup and such. We have the alcohol sweeteners, which I will be talking about. That's erythritol and xylitol. And then we have the non-caloric sweeteners, monk fruit and stevia. These are just different types and different forms that Now Foods makes. And what you can do with this chart, you can get lots of information. You can, you can know how many calories are in each of these sweeteners. So these are all 0. Their glycemic index, which I just talked about, these are all 0 again. Their glycemic impact, are they keto friendly if you're on the keto diet? And then now, if you want to use sweeteners for baking and you want to replace sugar, then you need what's called the equivalency. You need to know how much of this particular sweetener would you use to replace it with sugar in a recipe. So here on this line is sugar. So for 1 cup of sugar here, you can replace that with 2 teaspoons of this monk fruit liquid, or 2 teaspoons of the better stevia liquid, or 1 cup of xylitol, etc. So this just really helps you take the thinking out of it to make it equally sweet. All right, so I'm going to give you some background in the sweeteners, and then we'll go into the recipes at the end, some of which are, by the way, very, very that have, 0 calories, at least in the amounts that you would ever eat them in. They have 0 calories. You couldn't possibly eat enough because they are very, very sweet by nature. So you only need a few drops and you would never use enough to get any calories out of them. But these sweeteners, which, I have some here, I've got lots and lots, I use lots of them. They're easiest to use in hot and cold beverages. So anywhere you would use a sweetener now, your tea, your latte, your coffee, you name it. Maybe you make protein shakes. Sometimes I like to use a plain protein powder and flavor it according to what I want, or make it as sweet as I want, and I can be flexible and adjust it. Custards as an example, sauces, a lot of sauces, people don't like to buy the commercially made ones like ketchup and such because they got so much sugar added into them, even barbecue sauce. So if you want to make homemade sauces, there's another example. So those are the easiest kind of uses for them, and I will show you lots of examples. But if you're wondering, can I bake with stevia and monk fruit? So the answer is yes and no. You can, but with some caveats. That's what I'm going to show you here. So, important thing to know is that when we bake with sugar, say this lovely cake here, sugar is not only something that provides the sweetness to us, so we can replace the sweetness, but it also provides structure, like this lovely structure. And sugar also browns, so it gives texture, structure. So chemically speaking, it's more complicated than just something that adds sweetness. So my advice, and I'm not a huge baker, but the advice out there, if you want to use these kind of sweeteners, is to replace, for every 1 cup of sugar that you're replacing, to replace it with about 1/4 cup of some, and I see a typo here, not blunking, a bulking agent. You want something else that's going to replace that space that sugar takes up, the bulk that it does. So here are some examples, like reconstituted egg whites, protein powder, apple sauce, fruit puree, yogurt, say, Greek yogurt, avocado. And these are the other sugars that I am going to be talking about, the alcohol sugars that are more similar to sugar, because if you look at them, they look like sugar. So you need to kind of compensate for some of that bulk. The finished product may be more dense than you're used to, so there's some playing around. It might not be exactly the same. Adding some baking powder might help with the bulking. And checking the batter consistency for those of you who are used to baking to see, like, does it seem the same? Is it as thick or is it thinner? And there's going to be a little bit of trial and error. So that is my advice if you want to try baking. Now, I don't bake a lot, but when I do bake, I certainly do use these sweeteners, but I sometimes mix a combination of sweeteners. I might use a little bit of ordinary sugar, like half the amount in the recipe, and then maybe some stevia or monk fruit, and maybe some of the other erythritol and xylitol, combination of all, trying to reduce the sugar or eliminate it if I can. Now, in terms of, take another sip of water here. In terms of how sweet or how much you want to use of these, of course, all of these products have a recommended dose on them. This one maybe says 8 drops or 10 drops. So they have a recommended dose, but sweetness is very individual. So take it with a grain of salt completely. Adjust all recipes to desired sweetness. That includes the recipes I will be providing. Everything is to taste when it comes to sweeteners. But an interesting note is that if you're Canadian, which I assume most of you are, a lot of Canadians find American recipes to be too sweet. So that can be cultural too, in terms of how sweet our recipes are. And we all have this kind of bell curve where something gets to the perfect sweetness and then it gets too sweet, or not sweet enough. So you got to find that for yourself, and yours may not be the same as your, family members or friends. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about actual stevia. So stevia has been used for many centuries as a sweetener, and this is, it's amazing if you ever get a chance, because I've seen stevia little pot plants around, to try it, to pick off a green leaf and chew on it. And you always expect a green leaf to be bitter. It is insanely surprising to have this really sweet taste when you're eating a leaf. So this is the stevia leaf. Stevia, you know, there's a variety of stevia species. Not all of them are sweet. It's native to South America, and they have used it there for centuries as a sweetener. But in 1931, a scientist discovered that what makes stevia sweet is this molecule called, this group of molecules called steviosides. So back in the, you know, centuries ago, they might have just taken the leaves, dried them out, ground it up as you've seen there, and used it that way. They probably didn't have, you know, like tropical fruit flavored stevia in drops as convenient as we do, but, you know, modern conveniences. Now Health Foods has done an amazing thing with their stevia, because one of the complaints about stevia, I'll be honest, from people is they'll say it has this bitter aftertaste. And before I'd ever tried the Now stevia, I bought a number of different stevias, and I got completely turned off stevia. I just didn't like it, bitter taste. That was the issue. So what they've done is they've taken the molecule of stevia that has those steviosides. The molecule of stevia actually does have glucose on it. It does have that simple sugar. But as I mentioned, you use so little of it that has no impact calorically speaking. And they've added on some glucose molecules using a chemical-free process. They just use an enzyme to add them on. And so the resulting is a better tasting stevia, which they call better stevia. And years ago, a friend of mine said, because I told her, no, I don't like stevia. She told me, and she had, so I always remember she had this particular one. She said, just try it. And I did, and I liked it. And so I never went back. And now I love the stevia, and I do use it. And I love the variety of different flavors. But not all stevias do taste the same. Now, also years ago, because I was always kind of a purist and I liked something to be in its most natural form. So I had this big bag of the stevia, maybe more like the original one, just ground up, so it's green colored. But I never used it, one, because the bitter aftertaste, but secondly, this is what happened. And what I show you here is before I've added the stevia into some water, and then, 15 minutes later, it's just settled and it doesn't mix. So it's not very soluble in water. Whereas if you take the Now Better stevia here, the powdered one, and put it in, it completely mixes. So that makes it so much more usable. Now, there was, I've seen online a circulating rumor, which is not true because I did my homework, that says the white stevia has been dyed with chemicals. That is not true at all. All they do here is that they extract the part of the stevia, the sweetness principle, the steviosides out, and leave the rest of the plant behind, including the part that makes it green, which is the chlorophyll. So this is not dyed at all. It's just an extract. So that can put your mind to rest. So it dissolves beautifully and easily. All right, so that's a little bit about stevia. Then there's a monk fruit. So this is what monk fruit looks like. It's a fruit. Monk fruit is not really, it's known to have kind of maybe more, generally speaking, of a flavor that appeals to more people. So no bitter aftertaste generally is what people would describe. It's native to Southeast Asia. It has been used for thousands of years as well as a sweetener. And it's about, depending on how it's made, it can be up to 200 times sweeter than sugar, and it goes by different names: Loheng Guo, Asian melon, or even Buddha fruit. So I don't know if Buddha ate this fruit, but that's certainly implied there, but not making any claims. It's vegan, of course, because it's a fruit, and it's gluten-free. It's naturally gluten-free. Just like stevia, it's 0 calories. Like stevia, it's keto-friendly, doesn't spike the blood sugar. And it's minimally processed because it's quite simple to make it. Monk fruit is just made really by extracting out the water component of the fruit and concentrating the sweetness principles, which, unlike in stevia, it's the stevia sides. In monk fruit, it's the mongrel sides that make it sweet. So now has different liquid monk fruits, and it has this one here, which is a combination of monk fruit and erythritol. I have yet to talk about erythritol, but I will get to that. The reason they make this combination, the reason sometimes you'll see combinations like this, is for the ease of those who are baking, who are looking for an easy way to replace sugar without doing any calculations. So by mixing these two together, they've created something that is equally sweet to sugar. So a teaspoon of this tastes like, in sweetness, like a teaspoon of sugar. And so you can just replace it without thinking too much. And it has a really lovely flavor profile. But this monk fruit here is sustainably sourced. As I said, it's minimally processed. It's not hard to make. Kosher and halal. It's approximately 30 times sweeter than sugar in this form here in the drops. Same as the stevias. So I can drop it on my hand and eat it in my mouth, and it's, you know, it's not too sweet to tolerate, but it definitely is sweet. Nice thing about these is that now, you know, it's family owned, but it's a very big company. It's been around for a long time, and they do their own in-house quality testing and use third-party labs, but they have the rare advantage of being able to test every batch, which you cannot do typically unless you own your own labs, because it's very expensive. So because of that, they can have consistency of flavor, and they test every batch to guarantee that it is a high percentage of the magroside, which is the sweetness principle. Because of that, it means not only is the taste consistent, but it's typically higher than a lot of other brands. So you end up having to use less drops, which means it lasts longer. And I was actually won awards for their line of monk fruit, so well recognized for it. And they were the first fully certified organic line of any major health food company in North America for their monk fruit. So it's all fully certified, every product. All right, so those are the non-nutritive sweeteners. Now I want to just say a little bit about those alcohol sugars I mentioned, erythritol and xylitol. So firstly, you know, these are naturally occurring in very small amounts. Despite the fact that they're called sugar alcohols, they're not sugar, and they're not alcohol in the sense that, you know, you can't get drunk or inebriated from using these sugars. So they have, you know, it's more of a term in chemistry, and there's alcohol groups, but it's not the same thing, just so you understand. They are reduced calorie sweeteners, and it varies their caloric content depending on which alcohol sweetener. There's different types. And they have a minimal effect on blood sugar. Again, depending, they're all different. So these are all different names of different alcohol sweeteners that you might see out there in products. And you can identify them often by the OL for alcohol at the end of their name: erythritol, xylitol, maltitol, mannitol. So these products here, we've got xylitol. We have erythritol mixed with monk fruit, which is a lovely one-to-one replacement of sugar. Erythritol icing. So what is that? Erythritol icing is the same thing as this erythritol, but it's ground up much finer. So it's basically like confectioner's powder. And I have it in a container with just some little holes that I can, you know, it's like just putting icing on. I will show you how to use that. It's wonderful. And it's the only organic erythritol out there that exists since I last checked. Some things about sugar alcohols. One is they're similar to sugar in sweetness, at least these two. They don't taste exactly like sugar because they're not sugar, but they're, so xylitol is equally sweet to sugar, and erythritol is a little less sweet than sugar, but close, about 70% as sweet. They add bulk. So unlike stevia and monk fruit that I was talking about, these add bulk because you can see they look like, you know, there's like sugar in a bag. They can add texture like sugar does, and they're non-karyogenic, meaning they don't cause cavities, unlike sugar. And because of that, xylitol is used in a lot of products out there, like gums, now uses them in their mouthwash, in their toothpaste and such. So you will see xylitol in lots of products, so you can chew gum without the cavities. I'm going to give you, for some aficionados, a bit more information about xylitol and erythritol for those who want to bake with it, so you can, you know, take some screenshots and such. For those of you who don't need that much information, you can just sort of zone out a little bit if you want. I won't take offense. But here are some details. So here are, again, the different types of alcohol sugars, but I'm just focusing on xylitol and erythritol because that's what I'm familiar with. So xylitol is as sweet as sugar, so 100%, and erythritol about 75%, close, but not as sweet. In terms of calories, so xylitol has a little bit, so calories per teaspoon, it has 10 calories per teaspoon. Erythritol has not even 1 calorie per teaspoon. So, you know, for many people, even those with diabetes, using small amounts might be perfectly fine. You can always ask your doctor. And you can see erythritol is 0 on the glycemic index, so it doesn't have an impact on blood sugar, generally speaking, for, you know, these healthy individuals that it was tested on. If you're diabetic, again, you can ask your doctor about it. You can test and see how you react to it. But generally speaking, it's going to be pretty safe for most healthy individuals, for sure. And xylitol is low on the glycemic index, but it's not 0. So I provided quite a few details here comparing xylitol and erythritol and the table sugar as a comparison. So the sweetness, as I mentioned, xylitol is 1-to-1. You can replace sugar. Erythritol is a little bit less sweet. Interesting thing, as I said, they don't taste exactly like sugar. So if you put erythritol or xylitol in your mouth, you can tell it's not sugar. Erythritol and xylitol have this, xylitol more so like a cooling sensation, it feels like when they're in your mouth. And it's hard to describe without trying it, but maybe you ever had a peppermint stick around the holidays, that's kind of that cooling sensation. Peppermint has that too. One of the potential side effects you can get from xylitol, just to be aware of, and it's just dose dependent, is if you have too much of it, it attracts or it draws water into the digestive tract, and it could cause a little bit of gas or loose stools or bloating. Some people can build up a tolerance, and it's definitely dose dependent. So if you use a lot of it, like you're having the gum and the this and the that, erythritol is it doesn't work, or it isn't digested quite the same way, and so you can typically tolerate it without any of those digestive issues. So if someone's sensitive to xylitol, they can have erythritol instead. Got the calories here. So erythritol is almost no calories, very low per teaspoon. The glycemic index, these are safe for teeth, both of them. They don't cause cavities. Xylitol is toxic to dogs and ferrets, so that is an important thing to remember. Don't leave it hanging around your kitchen or open if you have a dog. Same thing if you've got like natural toothpaste with xylitol. And some of the sources, natural sources they can come from. And here's a little more detail when it comes to baking. And again, this is more for those who are really gung-ho in knowing the details in replacing sugar. So xylitol is a 1-to-1 replacement for sugar. And for erythritol, you need about 1 1/3 cups of erythritol to replace 1 cup of sugar. So a bit more. Doesn't dissolve as well as sugar. So both of these don't dissolve as well as sugar. That means when you're baking with them, you're just not going to get the exact same, not necessarily bad, but it's going to be a little bit different because you're working, it's like chemistry when we do baking. So there are some suggested different uses for xylitol or erythritol when it comes to making things based on their slight differences, where xylitol is recommended for syrups, jams, cookies, and candy. And I will show you a great caramel recipe I made. Whereas erythritol, more recommended for cakes, cheesecakes, and ice cream. I haven't made most of these. I'm just not that much of a baker. So here are some tips if you're using these, which again I'll just leave as a, you can take a snapshot and learn this in your own time. Browning, so they don't caramelize or brown like sugar does because they're different. A little bit about the heat tolerance, but this is heat stable and they do tolerate heat. They lower the freezing point, so that may make a difference if you're making something that you usually freeze, might make a difference or not. And xylitol and erythritol absorb water, so maybe they absorb more water than regular sugar does. Speaking of water. And this can cause dryness. So that means you might require additional liquid to your recipes. So, it's just going to be a little bit different is what I'm saying. All right. Finally, we're at our recipe portion. Very excited. Let's see. All right. So this first recipe here, buckwheat banana bread, I've been making 4 years. I will never make banana bread without buckwheat flour. It is a game changer. Buckwheat flour has its own natural sweetness that ordinary flours just don't have. So highly recommend trying this. So here are all the ingredients. I won't read them all out, but wanted to highlight that. Wanted to emphasize that this is added at the end, the vinegar, which says so in the directions. But it's pretty straightforward. And in this, I use the coconut stevia just because my taste buds said that, and I've made this recipe without any sweetener too, because buckwheat's naturally sweet, but I like a bit. And my taste buds said, I think coconut and banana goes well together, but you might like a different flavor because the better stevia comes in, gosh, I thought maybe about 10 flavors. All right. This was a drink that I didn't make up, but I fell in love with this recipe. It's like a non-cola type of cola. Love it in the summer. Sounds strange, but you'll be shocked. Everyone who I've said to try it loves it. Balsamic vinegar, which has a little bit of a sweetness, mixed with bubbly water, which I make my own at home, and then a little monk fruit to taste. Kind of tastes like a nice alternative to Coca-Cola, refreshing and lovely. You just have to try it. So I use monk fruit in this, is my preferred, and I don't usually flavor it, but you certainly could. Now I came up with this recipe here because my niece loves hot chocolate, but she is not supposed to have too much sugar and she's not supposed to have too much caffeine either. So I use carob powder instead of chocolate powder, this now carob powder. Carob is a great alternative to cacao if you don't want the caffeine, and naturally chocolatey tasting and quite nutritious actually. And then I used soya milk powder. This is non-GMO. And I sweeten it. The sweeteners I love are, we have the dark chocolate and peppermint cookie flavor is delicious. And just blend all of that. And of course you can adjust all of these as you like. So that's my hot chocolate. Now, I didn't invent the idea of chia jam, but I love it. And it's really a staple in my diet now. I never used to eat jam. So chia jam is made with berries. You can use fresh ones, but I always have frozen berries, any ones you like. So I take those frozen berries, I mix them on the stove till they kind of warm up and start to just get a bit soft, and I crush them. So they're kind of like jam consistency. Then I add the chia seeds. Chia seeds have an amazing property. They're kind of jelly-like and they absorb water and they make things mucilaginous or jelly-like jam. So these little seeds here, which it looks like strawberry seeds, but it's not. That's the chia seed. And then at the end, I add a sweetener, and I really like the pomegranate blueberry flavor goes well for jam. And then I just liberally pour this, and it spreads like jam over my, my toast with my nut butter. So I love that. Very easy to make. I can make it in really in 5 minutes. And I didn't put that here, but I do put a little bit of lemon juice or citric acid just to give some acidity to that jam as well. All right, now this is my invention, and it's fabulous that it's very easy. It's very simple. I basically wanted to make maple flavored popcorn or caramel flavored popcorn without the sugar or anything like that. So what I do is I make popcorn, I air pop it, but you can make it however you want. And then I, of course, if you are cooking it on the stove, you will have some cooking oil. But then I melt some oil that I'm going to pour over the popcorn. It could be butter, or you might use flaxseed oil if you don't use butter, in which case you don't have to melt it because it's already in a liquid form. You take that oil, I put the stevia drops straight into that melted butter or into the flaxseed. After the popcorn is ready, I pour that, flavored butter or flax oil or any oil that you want over the popcorn, and then I add in all kinds of spices. I tend to use a lot: onion powder, garlic powder, salt, and Cajun Mexican is a new favorite on popcorn, which I just picked up at Kensington Market in Toronto. I love that spice if you haven't tried it. And then nutritional yeast, which is a favorite of mine. I put that in everything, in salads and stir fries and popcorn. It has a naturally cheesy-like flavor, but it's non-dairy, so anyone can have it. It's actually very nutritious. So that's the popcorn. Now, dark chocolate egg muffin. So this is an adapted recipe from one I saw online. Super fast to make, a healthy breakfast. You need 2 ripe bananas, 4 eggs, any berries. So I get the frozen berries out of the freezer, and you could use any flavor stevia, but I like the dark chocolate in this. Basically, I just mush up those bananas in a bowl and then add the eggs, mix that, it easily mixes, add the stevia, so you've got that liquid. I put some of those frozen berries just into the bottom of the muffin tins, in all of them. Then I pour this mixture over those berries, put it in the oven for just 12 to 15 minutes, and you have these lovely muffins, but definitely healthier because they've got protein and berries, and they've got the bananas as sweetener and the stevia. Now this recipe, I almost went into a business with somebody because I loved this recipe, and I was going to call them bean nookies, but now I'm just giving the recipe away. So it's Peppermint-Chocolate bean nookies. Now, I'm not the first person to make bean-based baked products. That was a thing, and it still is, and it's a healthier version, and it's amazing how beans can replace flour. So this is a flourless recipe. I usually cook my own beans, but you can just buy canned beans. These are just all the, the different ingredients. You can use, all of these are to taste. So, you taste the batter at the end. You might want more than a 1/4 teaspoon or less than a 1/4 teaspoon. But I tried to make this a very low sugar cookie. It does have some maple syrup, but not a ton, just a 1/4 cup. And then one of the real keys to this, because it's not made with flour and it doesn't really rise, it's a bit more dense, is I keep them in the freezer. And then I take them out, I leave them for about 5 minutes to get a little soft and eat them. And that's how they taste best. Their texture is best. So I don't keep them in the refrigerator. And I really love them. This is a very easy recipe, especially if you have something like a soda stream at home and you make your own bubbly water and you just want to flavor it. I don't like buying those pre-made ones in the plastic bottles with the, whatever flavorings they are. I love to add the stevia, and I like these 2 flavors, pomegranate, blueberry, and lemon twist. And I should add, Oh, we also have, I forgot, a tropical fruit. That one goes well. So in the summertime, these are something that I make a lot. I'll put just a couple of drops or maybe more, depending on who I'm making it for. Chia puddings, of course, are another thing that I did not invent, but I also use the stevia in a chia pudding. So chia, as I mentioned, it's a unique seed, and it's just so versatile, and it has this way of absorbing water and swelling up and making this kind of pudding-like consistency, which a lot of people love, and it can make a lovely, like you're eating pudding for breakfast. So there's been a trend for a while to throw chia seeds with some other liquids into the refrigerator overnight, and then the next morning it's kind of gotten into this perfect pudding-like consistency. So you just mix chia seeds with some water. You could use any milk, but I like the soy milk to have some more protein. So I'm a fan of the soy milk. I like flavoring it with blueberry, pomegranate, stevia. So all of these things, you just throw them into a jar, leave them overnight or for 2 hours, and then you can top it off with some fruits, coconut flakes, whatever you like, bee pollen. Yeah, you can go crazy. So that's the chia pudding. Brownies with xylitol. These were very nice. I did make them. They were delicious, but just confession, that's not a picture of my brownies. They didn't look that beautiful, and I'm not that great a photographer. But in this recipe, I'm gonna take a sip here now. So I used the xylitol and Greek yogurt to add some protein into these. And there is some flour, but it's a pretty healthy recipe versus just the normal sugar and lots of white flour recipe. So it has protein in it and definitely lower sugar, and they were very tasty. Now, I was surprised. I've made it once and I mean to make it again because it was great. So I made this, what I call keto caramel sauce. It landed up for me. This is my fancy picture. I put the caramel on top of these muffins I made, but I ended up using a lot of it. I kept them in the freezer, and it was just more like a caramel candy, which is delicious. So this is a little different for me to make, but the recipe is, involved butter and whipping cream. So certainly with dairy in it, xylitol and monk fruit. So we happen to have a caramel flavored monk fruit, which really just brings out the flavor of this great recipe. And here are the directions. I won't read it out. A little bit of blackstrap molasses, which is a sweetener I actually really like, and it's a good source of iron. Now this is I have to say, an entirely ugly looking picture, but this was my toast. It's just something that I experimented with, and I thought, oh, I kind of like it, so I'm going to share it. This is sourdough bread, and then I took my nut butter. It could be any kind. It might have been almond butter or cashew butter, and I mixed the nut butter with cinnamon and some xylitol. And sometimes I just sprinkle the xylitol on, and it was just tasty. It made my breakfast just a little bit more desserty. I did make this meringue cha-cha-cha dish, but this is not a picture of mine. It was great, and I was surprised. I made it once. I probably won't again because it's just too much fuss for me. But I enjoyed making it, and I used xylitol and no sugar at all, and it worked quite well. So definitely, if you're into more elaborate type of baking, this is something for you to try, just to show you that you can use some of these sugar substitutes really well as a substitute for sugar to make even something like a meringue. Now, as I mentioned, this erythritol icing, which is just a more fine erythritol, is a great confectioner's sugar. So these are all the things that I have done with, I think, except that one. That's not my picture, but I actually made here this is the blue icing on whatever cookies that I made here. So what I did was, you know, you just mix the erythritol icing with enough water, and it's icing. It's basically icing. Works beautifully, but I put in here a little bit of something to dye it blue, which I'm forgetting right now what it was, but it wasn't an artificial dye. Sometimes I just have the erythritol again in a dispenser with a little hole, so I sprinkle it on. It can make something look really pretty at the end when you're baking. And when I make my buckwheat pancakes, and I got bananas here and blueberries, and I've poured maybe a little maple syrup, then I often just will take that erythritol icing and sprinkle it on top. It's beautiful, it's presentable, and it adds a little bit of sweetness. So I love this. And as I mentioned, it's the only organic erythritol on the market. And you can also use sweeteners for things that are not desserts. So I've made this recipe a lot and I love it. It is actually on the nowfoods.ca website. You can look up Zesty Lime Slaw. And the sugar alternative I use in here is this erythritol with monk fruit, which has such a beautiful taste. That blend of monk fruit and erythritol is just perfect. That sometimes if I make just say an Earl Grey tea, it really just tastes like I put sugar in it. It has that lovely taste profile for me. So this is nice. I enjoy this salad a lot, and it's so healthy. Cabbage is so healthy. Cilantro is not for everyone. Some people might want to omit that, but I love it. So there's apparently, genetically speaking, some of us love it, some of us hate it. I like cilantro so much that I have juiced it and drank a whole glass of it. So that's just, for those of you who hate it, you might be cringing. I think I'm almost at the end here. So here's a recipe. I have not made this, but the recipe is at nowfoods.ca as well. It's sweet and tangy barbecue sauce. I just don't barbecue much, but just to show you can make ketchup or barbecue sauces using stevia extracts. In this case, they use this extract powder, which comes with a tiny little scoop in there, little scooper. And I think that might be, yeah, that was my last recipe, but you know, you can try anything. So I hope you found that interesting and fun. Hope you enjoyed as much as I did, because I just love talking about these sweeteners and my recipes. Thank you so much for listening and attending. And I will gladly take some questions. For anyone who's put your questions in the chat, please transfer your questions to the Q&A area. That's where I'm going to check. If you are named as anonymous, just so you know, I will only take a few of the anonymous, because what can happen is I don't know if it's the same person again and again, and I like to give everyone a chance to answer their questions. So I will go through and answer as many as I can in 15 minutes, which we have. So I ended right on time, which is great. All right, so